Hey guys, welcome back to the Dr. Cliff Show. I'm Cliff Olson, Doctor of Audiology and founder of Applied Hearing Solutions in Phoenix, Arizona. And I am joined today with a very special guest, Dr. Gus Mueller. Gus, thank you for coming all the way out to Arizona to see me.
I know, it's a long way from North Dakota.
Excellent. Well, I've always actually wanted to have you on the show since I started the show. I'll get into a little bit of background about how I even met you in the first place. I was actually a student, a fourth-year student at Arizona Ear Center out here in Phoenix, and you had come out, and I believe at the time it was with Odometrics, so a diagnostic equipment company, and you gave an all-day talk in training on best practices. So we had talked about reeler measurement, we had talked about test box measures, things of that nature, and at the end, first off, I don't know if you remember me from actually being in there. I wouldn't expect you to.
Well, possibly.
Because that was literally 8 years ago yesterday that happened. And do you have any idea why I know that date?
Hopefully we wouldn't have a beer afterwards.
We did not have a beer. But what happened is that you brought in a priceless book.
Wow.
You brought in a priceless book, Probe Microphone Measurements, right? And I went and dug it out last night. And I opened it up, and what does it have on there? It's literally signed by you, and it says 2nd of October, 2015, somewhere in Arizona. You happen to be in Scottsdale, just so you know.
That is pretty amazing. And by the way, just for the record, this some people have called this the pink book. I was the one who picked out the color. It's dusty metallic rose.
Oh, okay.
It is not pink.
It's not pink.
Just so you know,
dusty metallic rose.
Yeah, I don't want you calling it the pink book.
Well, now I can safely put it out on display now that I know
absolutely.
It's not a pink book. Yeah. So, you know, that was really, I don't want to say my first introduction to best practices in general, but it was really my first introduction into the concept that best practices were a construct. They're like a combination of different things, because in my mind it was reeler measurement was the thing that I got stuck on in grad school, that I was like, that's it. But you opened my eyes to it's more than that, and you actually told me, Cliff, if you want to be a good audiologist, print off a set of best practice guidelines, follow them, and you'll be in the top 5% of audiologists out there.
Well, that sounds like something I might say. I'm not sure it's true, but it'd give you a good start.
Yeah, well, I feel like it gave me a good start. But let's talk about your start a little bit.
Sure.
You found, for some reason, you got into audiology, and I'd really like to know what that story was.
Well, there's two sides of it. The one was for some reason I got an A in trigonometry and thought I should be an engineer, and then went to college and realized that was a big mistake. I ended up somehow ending over in speech language pathology, partly because my fraternity brothers told me that you didn't have to study a lot if you were in speech language pathology. But then I was also in ROTC, which they probably didn't have that around when you were in school, but Reserve Officers Training Corps. So I was in the Army in a college, ROTC kind of thing. And I'm going along, and I needed the money, so that's why I was in it. And then my senior year, a magazine came out, the ASHA magazine from the American Speech and Hearing Association, and they had a special little section of audiologists in the Army. And so my professor at the time called me into his office and said, "Did you see this?" You know, he said, you have to go into the Army, right? And I said, "Yeah, for 2 years. Oh, and by the way, this is Vietnam days."
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they said, "You have to go in for 2 years. Why don't you do this audiology thing?" And of course, I was just so happy to make it through my bachelor's. It had never occurred to me that I would go on to graduate school. So then I had this problem of getting accepted in a graduate school with a 2.2 overall. That's on a 4-point system.
That's a little on the low side.
It's a little on the low side. So the professor said, "I'm going to give you the 6 easiest schools to get into." He took out a book, and I applied to all 6 and got into one of the 6 in audiology, and I was initially in the infantry, got my branch transfer into the medical service corps, and the rest was history.
How long did it take to get that transfer over?
Well, to me it seemed like forever. Yeah. Fortunately, a well-known audiologist, Jerry Northern,
Yep.
had been quoted saying about all the hearing loss that was occurring in the Army at the time. And there was a photo of a fellow in Vietnam with cigarette butts in his ear canal. It made front page of the Washington Post, got picked up and across the nation. And Congress authorized 12 more slots for Army audiology. Coincidentally, the same time that my application hit somebody's desk, and they said, his grades aren't great, but he'll fill the bill. And actually, my graduate school grades were good. So yeah, that was it, and then ended up staying 20 years in the Army.
Yeah, and so clearly, I didn't used to think of it this way when I was in the Marine Corps, but I thought of individuals who retired from the military were ancient. All right, because they're what, and they're like 40?
And had white hair?
Maybe not even that, honestly. And now that I'm 41, I'm like, man, you're still a young guy coming out as a retired military veteran.
I was 42 when I retired.
So 42, and so obviously you continued on your career after that. It basically just starting.
That was like the minor leagues.
Yeah, and so then what happened after that? Where did you end up going? What did you end up doing?
Wow. Well, I did all the things that the Army wouldn't allow me to do because you're very restricted, and as you should be, because you're working at a major medical center, and moonlighting was frowned on and all that. But I really was interested in hearing aids and industry, and I was really interested in teaching, and I'd always wanted to be in private practice because of course in the military, it was so nice to make people happy giving away hearing aids that I thought, well, maybe I could just have a practice and that would be nice. So I did all three things starting when I got out of the military. I started a private practice. I started consulting for Siemens Hearing Instruments, and I started teaching at Vanderbilt University. All of those in 1991.
91. So you must have been living in the Nashville area when you were doing that, because was there a such thing as remote learning?
Yeah, they're called airplanes.
Okay.
I would go in, and the students hated it, but it worked. I would fly in and do 8 hours a day for 5 days, and that was my course at Vanderbilt.
So tell me that. So the students also had to do 8 hours a day
absolutely.
for 5 days? That does sound miserable.
It was, but we got the job done. They were, at the time, they were in between audiology professors at Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
And as time went on, we spaced it out a little bit more, and I'd come in maybe 4 times a year. And until just a couple years ago, I was still doing the very same thing. So we did that probably for 25 years or so.
And so, I mean, what years would that have spanned then?
Well, when the teaching at Vandy just ended 3-4 years ago because they have so many other good teachers, they really don't need me now. But it went from 91, went for 25 years or more, where I taught there.
And you probably did a lot of work with what, Todd Ricketts out
absolutely.
there?
Absolutely. A lot of research projects, both on things that he and I dreamed up ourselves, but then also because I was a consultant for Siemens, we would have, I was on their research team, and we would come up with projects that needed to be done. And there was about, 6 or 7 good facilities who did good, clean, independent research. And so we would farm those out to various places like that. And of course, Vanderbilt was one of our favorites, and it was convenient for me because I was already there part-time. So, and that Ben Hornsby is a good researcher who's also there. So they picked up a lot of the research stuff. So
what are you doing nowadays? You said that you ended up doing that till about 3 or 4 years ago, and then what did you transition into doing?
Well, wow. All those years, also at the same time, I forgot to add my 4th job. Maybe that's why the private practice didn't work so well. I was dabbling in too many other things.
Yeah, right.
I also started a column at the Hearing Journal called Page 10. And I moved, that started in '93, and then I moved that over to Audiology Online 12 years ago. So I've had a monthly column for a lot of years.
Yeah.
So
you've been a content creator before that was even really a thing.
Well, I found a lot of good authors. Yeah. That was my job, is to encourage people to write a good article. And I just wrote the lead-in column and helped them with their articles. And I still do that today. So I'm still working for Audiology Online with the monthly column 20Q with Gus. I still do consulting for what is now Signia, which is sort of the
offshoot
progression of
transition,
Signia. I don't want to go through all the details,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
in my mind, it's still sort of Siemens because there's aspects of the products that's the same as the Siemens products of days gone by. And then I still I teach at Rush University in Chicago.
Nice.
And University of Northern Colorado. I teach classes for both of their AUD programs. So if you package all that together, it's still a pretty fun life.
Are you still flying out there and teaching for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week straight?
No, but I go to Rush and teach for 2 days of 8
full
hours
days
a
of
day.
that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So and so some things.
Very cool.
Yeah,
Very
some
cool.
things haven't changed.
So, I spend a lot of time dealing with adult hearing loss. I mean, pretty much everyone who watches my channel, that's primarily the thing that they care about. So what do you think about where we're currently at with the hearing aid industry right now? And when I say hearing aid industry, I think we have to combine prescription hearing aid industry and OTC. What has been your perception of how that, really with OTC kind of blending in with prescription, what's your perception of how things are right now in the industry?
Wow. I as you know, I don't have a private practice, so I'm not seeing patients directly. So a lot of it is just what I get from keeping my ear to the ground. I think number one, I think the impact that OTC had on the profession, what I'm sensing is doesn't seem to be as significant as what people thought it was going to be. And of course, part of it is that we have the OTC, which is a true FDA, and I don't have to tell you this, but then we have the direct-to-consumer, which you don't really know how many of those are being sold. I think I haven't seen a big change in the last couple years. Obviously going back to when I started fitting hearing aids 50 years ago, so there's been a lot of changes over 50 years.
Yeah.
I went through.
This might not even be the most significant shift that you've seen.
Oh, not even close.
In the hearing aid industry.
Well, I for the first 6 years I practiced, audiologists weren't allowed to sell hearing aids.
Yeah.
It was
in
that.
The first, okay.
Yeah. That wasn't until 1977.
Yeah, it's considered unethical,
yes,
right? Yeah.
Absolutely. So there was, in fact, I can tell you, I had just gotten my PhD, and I was a cool doctor, and I remember one of my fellow PhD persons, John Jarvis, I don't mind saying his name because he's a good guy and became very successful, he decided to set up a private practice and sell hearing aids, and all the rest of us were going, oh, no. He goes, hey, it's okay now. And of course now it's common practice.
For sure.
So that was a huge change. Another thing was that happened then down the road. It had to do with, I don't even know what started it, but it had to do with professional meetings. If a manufacturer had like a suite, an open house, and maybe they were giving away free drinks, it was considered unethical for you as a member of the ASHA to even go in that room. And there were like secret rooms where the party was, and you had to knock, and somebody would look to see
like a speakeasy or something.
Now, of course, there's a door 10 feet wide, and they're herding people.
Right.
Come on in, we got a party,
Yeah.
So yeah. That's hugely different.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. I've only been in this profession really, when I started grad school, it was 2012.
Yeah,
was the start for me. And I think obviously a lot of these major changes that you're talking about had already taken place, all of that stuff. And, I feel like the industry hasn't actually changed a whole lot since I've been in it. I think that really OTC has been probably the biggest shift that a lot of the younger generation audiologists have seen. And we didn't have enough, I think, understanding and background of the history of audiology to know that this is something that's typical. You're always going to see change, and it's probably not just audiology. It probably happens in every profession
of course,
that's out there. Another thing that I want to talk about in the progression of audiology really is the APSO, so the Audiology Practice Standards Association. You've been working with them to develop these practice standards, but I think a lot of viewers, at least on my channel, I talk about best practices all the time, but we didn't even have standards in our profession. Yeah. So can you speak a little bit about the APSO and really what the intent is there?
Yeah. Well, I'm not an official member of it, but I was on the writing committee that wrote the hearing aid standard, so I can only comment on that. And your point is very well taken. Normally, the way things work in the world is, that there is a standard, and then after the standard has been established, then there would be guidelines, and then after the guidelines have been established, there's best practice. So there's sort of layers there. And for some reason, we sort of started out with the guidelines. I was on one of the first guidelines, written in 1990, that was published in 2 different journals for fitting hearing aids, which included things like probe mic measures and those kinds of things. Over the years, by my count, there's been at least 5 more different guidelines that have been written in the U.S. And then if you look at other countries, several of them, the British Academy of Audiology, they have guidelines, but they're all labeled guidelines. And I think what the APSO people, what they believed was, why don't we just come up first with a standard, and then we'll filter down to guidelines. And at least that was my understanding of why they formed the organization. And so that was what I was involved with, was then writing what was a standard for fitting hearing aids. And the way we tried to think about this is the standard wasn't really even best practice. It was just sitting down and saying, if you were a good audiologist, what would you do? It wasn't like, what would you do to be in the upper 99%? It's just, what would be considered good practice? And if it's good practice, that would be a standard,
Yeah.
If you put in an outlet by your sink, there should be something on it that it automatic shuts off, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a standard,
Right.
That's not super fancy. It's just, that's the standard.
Right.
And so we were looking at standards like, I don't know if I want to relate electrician to audio, but you get the point.
Yeah, well, so I guess if you're an electrician, if you're not following whatever the best practice is, you might end up dead at some point or another, right? I don't know if that happens in audiology.
I don't know, those hearing aids.
Maybe that bad. So there's a couple of, and I actually highlighted a couple of areas in the hearing aid standard for adults and geriatric patients, and I'd like to go through a couple of those with you right now here off the bat. So number 4 on the standard is talking about pre-fitting testing that includes assessment of speech recognition and noise. I talk about, a different tests like the QuickSim, the 2-minute speech and noise test, the hint test. There's a variety of them out there. Why is that so important?
Well,
as the standard, right?
I'm sure you have a time limit on this little show.
Listen, Gus,
I'll try to keep it short.
For hours if you want to talk to me.
No, I'll try to keep it short. Let's start off with if you were having trouble seeing things at a distance away and you went to your optometrist, you probably would expect that your optometrist would do a test to see how well you could see things far away.
I would hope so.
I'm guessing at that.
I would hope so.
Well,
yeah.
Okay. What is the main reason that most people walk in to have a hearing test, at least very close to number 1, and I'm going number 1, is they're having trouble understanding in background noise. I think we owe it to our patients that to at least take a look at the problem that they're presenting. Okay, so we can start with that. And so I think it would be, in fact, I would think the average patient might say, hey, wait a minute, I came here with this problem understanding of background noise. You haven't tested it. What's going on here? So number 1, but number 2, there's so many things that we can learn from this test, and there are considerable data that have been published that shows the one thing, the pretest, that correlates the best. And in the last study I saw was 2 years ago. They looked at 6 different pretests, ways that you could analyze a person's hearing. The one thing that agreed with long-term benefit and satisfaction was speech understanding and background noise. It was not the person's pure tone loss. It was not the person's word recognition and quiet. It was speech and noise testing. So that's number 2, is that you want to do a test that gives you an idea of how well is this person going to do in the real world. And then number 3 is, I think that you can use speech and noise testing as a sort of a validation or a demonstration of the benefit of hearing aids.
Right.
Again, if I'm buying hearing aids, I would like the person that fitting me showing me that they really work. And I'd say, aren't you going to like sit me down and test me without them on, and then test me with them on, and so I can do a comparison?
Right.
That seems like a reasonable thing to do.
Yeah, I would agree completely on all of that.
Yep.
And I've been a huge advocate of doing the speech and noise testing. I find it hard to know how to even counsel a patient on how they would do in a background noise situation if I have no understanding of their actual performance when I'm doing the test.
Well, as you perhaps have followed over the past 5 years or so, the group out at Stanford University, led by Matt Fitzgerald, they have a group. I think they have around 5,000 patients, where they have done both speech and quiet and speech and noise. And they just published these results in Ear and Hearing last month. And their conclusion is there's little reason to do speech testing and quiet, because you learn everything you need to know about the patient from doing speech and noise. So if somebody said, oh, I'm really busy, I don't have time to do speech and noise, what you should say is, I'm really busy, I don't have time to do speech and quiet.
In quiet, yeah. No, it makes sense.
I mean, it's if one tells you one predicts the other, but this one doesn't predict that.
Right.
Do the one that predicts.
Yeah. No.
It isn't complicated, really.
And it doesn't even take that long to do the testing, is the thing.
4 minutes. That's 2 lists on 2 ears.
Yeah. There
it's
you
a
go.
minute per list.
There you go.
4 minutes of your time. I think we owe it to patients to do those 4 minutes.
I think we also owe it to patients to do LDL, so loudness discomfort levels, right? And that's actually in the standard here to test them frequency specific.
Yes.
Sometimes you'll find that people will do speech testing for LDL, right? And actually try to determine that way, but that doesn't, in my opinion, really help you out when you're actually going to determine how to program a hearing aid.
That's absolutely correct. If you have to say, why am I doing this testing in the first place? It's so that you can sit down and adjust the output of the hearing aid to give the person the maximum headroom. And I'm guessing not all your listeners are audiologists, so headroom basically means that when your hearing aid is amplifying here and there's peaks in the speech or music or whatever you're listening to, you do not want it to infringe on your loudness discomfort level. But if your loudness discomfort level's up here, you don't want to limit it here. It's like you spend your life sitting under a 40 watt bulb when there are times you want a 100 watt bulb.
That's exactly right.
And so you need those inflections. You need to know where to set the ceiling.
So you need the ideal for
Exactly.
that, right? You don't want to go too low, but you don't want to go too high.
Goldilocks.
Yeah.
It's the Goldilocks, and not too hot, not too cold, just right. Just right. And so the relative to doing speech LDLs, the problem is they're not frequency specific. So if I were fitting, if you said, this is my best friend, Gus, you better get it right. I have to program low frequencies, mid frequencies, and high frequencies. Speech is predominantly a low frequency. So all I have is information for low. Where am I going to set that at 2,000 hertz, at 3,000 hertz, at 4,000 hertz? I don't know, unless I do some type of frequency specific testing. Then you have to go into the fitting software and make sure that it is set there. We just, with my good friends down at University of Iowa, Wu, and I'll tell you the name of the woman in a minute. Anyway, Elizabeth, we looked at where it's commonly set by manufacturers, and it's way too low. Because everybody wants to be conservative.
That's right.
They don't want to say, I don't want to give you too much gain and output, but you got to give people enough.
Right. No, I totally agree.
And that's why it's in the standard.
So we have the testing of the loudness discomfort levels, and then setting the MPO appropriate to where we don't actually let that exceed where their discomfort would be.
Yes,
right?
But not too low.
And then here's the other thing. So when we talk about things like reserve gain, so they also have a volume control, so we would need to make sure that we're not allowing them to exceed their loudness discomfort levels by using their own volume control on that.
Exactly.
To what extent do you potentially make the sacrifice of making someone uncomfortable auditorily, but having that be a beneficial thing for like hearing maybe in background noise better? Yeah,
well, obviously that's where patient interaction and everything gets in. But if you have the output is a stop sign, okay? But we also have input compression, which is also going to control things. And so I think for background noise, you would rely more on the input compression, and in some cases the signal may never make it up to the stop sign, where in other cases it will make it up to the output. And I think there's a nice balance there. I don't see that as a big issue.
I usually don't see it as a huge issue nowadays with patients. I mean, the technology that we're playing with today is just unbelievable.
Yes,
and I have to imagine that me saying that, you're probably chuckling, because technology that you had to work with, 50 years ago, you're probably thinking like, oh my God.
Not 50, going back to 1990.
1990, okay.
What was when everything sort of changed. That was when there was the introduction of input compression with very low knee points. And that was for the first time we were able to take sounds that were soft, average, and loud in the real world and move them into the patient's world and make them soft, average, and loud. And before that, we had to, if we made soft sounds loud enough, loud sounds were too loud. If we made loud sounds okay, soft sounds are too soft. And so the repackaging, and that wasn't until the 1990s. Resound was the first to do it, along with the well-known K-Amp.
Cool. So I want to go a little bit further down, skip over a few of these standards, but when we get to standard number 9, it says an assessment of initial product quality is completed using standard electroacoustic measures to verify either manufacturer or published specifications. When I'm working with members who are trying to join the Hearing Up network, where I make sure that they're following certain best practice protocols, test box measures is one of them. And I have to say that that is the number one thing that most providers are not doing before they actually join my network. Why is that so important?
You know, well, first of all, I agree with you that it's not often done. I think that you know, we have, well, first of all, it's a real pain to do the testing.
It's an inconvenience, right?
It's probably something, I mean, it's probably something you don't need eight years of college to do. You hook a hearing aid up, and there's a protocol.
I will have my new assistant trained within a day of how to run it.
Exactly. So maybe that's part of it. And I think we have grown to believe that probably in 95% of the cases, it's going to be okay. You know, we're still going to plug the hearing aid in advance and make sure it's not dead. But, you know, maybe. Yeah, well, there are those days. But you're also looking at, you know, then if the distortion is a little off or that. I think it's one of those things that if you can get by letting it slide, and you probably won't get into serious trouble. I guess that's the best way I would describe it.
That's probably the mentality of it. But, you know, I just had a patient. I'm actually going to be trying to present this at AAA. I had a patient who is a Snowbird. Obviously, that's common down here in Arizona. But I've treated him for the past 4 years with hearing aids, does well with them, doesn't have the greatest hearing in the world. I mean, it's not like he's a star performer by any means. We've had the cochlear implant conversation before, but he ends up going back up to Colorado for the summer months and has troubles up there, and so he goes to a local provider. They basically test his hearing. Hearing came out exactly the same as what it was down here, and they're like, well, let's just try to turn up the volume a little bit, but in the meantime, your hearing's not very good. You should go get a cochlear implant evaluation. So he ends up going to do that because increasing the volume didn't work. They took him through cochlear implant candidacy testing with his hearing aids. He ended up qualifying for a cochlear implant, but didn't want to move forward till he came back down to see me. Comes back down, he's telling me kind of what was going on. I'm like, something doesn't sound right. And I did a listening check, and I'm like, I'm getting sound from the hearing aids, but he has such a weird configuration. Like, I don't know if that's what it should sound like or what it shouldn't sound like. Both hearing aids were malfunctioning majorly, and I wasn't able to identify it until I ran test box measures. He almost got cochlear implant. And the only thing that needed to be done was he was that fraction of a percent that would have slipped through. And I just love to see.
But it's an important fraction for him.
It's a very important fraction for him. And, you know, I test devices on a daily basis at the clinic, either myself or my assistant or my audiologist, right? And we're constantly identifying little things that are off. So, you know, distortion at, you know, one of the frequencies that are tested at 12%. It's like, well, you know, they didn't report a complaint to me, but then when we change like the receiver wire and it goes back down to 0.5%, they're like, this sounds way better. And it's not something that we would have even picked up on during a listening check.
And yeah, I agree. It sort of is. It used to be something in the old days. It was something we did considerably more often because we didn't have probe mic measures and we had to do something. I might add one thing relative to that. That's not the standard ANSI spec running, but the one common problem is with directional processing, and that is that the ports get plugged, and the directional is all about the timing. And if you just have a little bit of goop in one of those openings, it can take the best directional hearing aid in the world and turn it into an omnidirectional hearing aid. And there are systems where, of course, you can go in the test box and actually evaluate how good the directional processing is doing.
And we love that too.
Yeah.
And obviously that's
is that part of your standard?
It is part of it. So
well, see,
you have to
to
do
me, that would
directional
make
testing.
it worthwhile
Yep.
in itself.
Yep.
Todd Ricketts, I know, did a study on that. I think they found that maybe, I think it was 15% or so were not functioning as directional.
Yeah. I had seen it just not for directional microphones, but for whether they're meeting ANSI specifications or not. I've seen data. I think it was Kim Cavett, and I can't quote it exactly, but it was less of them malfunction or were not meeting specs for new devices. If they were sent off for repair and came back, a higher percentage of them were not meeting specs. I want to say maybe 15 to 18% of them.
Yeah.
But it's crazy to think. I mean, 15 to 18% doesn't seem like a lot when you just say it in 15 to 18%. But when you take 100 of your patients and you say, I'm going to allow 15 to 18 of you walk around with hearing aids that don't work, it just doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, if it were 100 people who had bought new cars, and 15% were not running correctly,
right?
You'd be hearing about it.
Exactly. I mean, and fortunately, you don't have to spend as much money on hearing aids as you do a car, but it's still a big expense, and you deserve to have those measures done. So let's move on to probably my favorite one, which is number 10, which is hearing aids are fitted so that various input levels of speech result in verified ear canal output that meets the frequency-specific targets provided by a validated prescriptive method. We're talking about real ear measurement here.
Yeah.
So, and I think it really says it in the standard. I think that anyone just, if you rewind this and listen to me say that again, it'd be like, well, that seems to make sense that you would verify that you're getting the right amount of amplification at different frequencies. And you've been asked this question probably 1,000 more times than I've been asked this question, but why is real ear measurement so important?
Wow, where to start? I think, well, first of all, the one thing that I think needs to be clarified, because it gets softened a little bit, it isn't just real ear measurement, it's verification to a validated prescriptive target. So we're very careful when we wrote that.
I totally
because there
understand
were
that.
people out there who say, I do real ear measurement, and the person walks out the door with a not so good fitting.
And so maybe I should change my verbiage of this, right? It's to actually like verify to a validated prescriptive method instead of real ear measurement all the time.
Yes.
Yeah, that's.
I was just did some talks in the UK, and there were some people there that asked me questions about that. They said, "Isn't in-situ testing is real ear? Therefore, I'm doing real ear testing." Which is in-situ testing, for those of you who do not know, is when the hearing aid itself is producing sounds. But it's not a substitute because you're missing out on all the other factors of the ear.
And Dr. Rachel Cook is going to be making some videos about that on the channel as well, comparing the two. Yeah.
We compared in one of our books. We compared. We took the same person and tested them with the software from 6 different companies using in-situ testing, which is something you might want to try, but it's you're not going to like the findings. They varied by 30 dB, as I recall.
Holy smokes! Are you serious?
Yeah.
Jeez,
from different companies.
Wow.
I mean, who's right? You know, who knows? So going back to your original question, I think you have to start off with buying into the belief that for the average person, we know the right gain and output that gives us the best shot at giving them optimum benefit. You have to buy into that. And there's research with 10,000 or more patients that says it's true. So if a person doesn't buy into that, then everything that comes afterwards is secondary. I during my military career, we talked about earlier, I lived by the right by the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. I was stationed at the Presidio of San Francisco, and I spent a lot of times going over and back my running, I was a little better at my running in those days, and I'd run across the bridge and back over lunch and sort of things. Anyway, when a lot of times when I'm talking to students, what I relate it to is that the bridge, it took all kinds of steel and concrete and cables and everything. That's the technology that built the bridge. But the bridge wouldn't be standing today if they didn't use a tape measure. And they had a prescription, they had a blueprint, they followed the blueprint, they had the technology, but it was the tape measure that held it all together. And probe mic measures are our tape measure. We have the blueprint. We have the DSL and the NAL, two very well-researched prescriptive methods. We have to believe in them, and then we have to say, I'm not going to allow somebody to walk out the door who I did not give my best shot to fit to this well-known, verified, researched method. Now, granted, some people are going to say, that's a little too loud. Okay, you have some time to change things. Some people, the math should be that some people think it's too soft, because it's for the average person.
Yeah.
But you need a standard, and you need to look at that, and it's to me it's not it shouldn't be a topic of discussion, because it's so straightforward. There are no data that shows that some of the other methods, some of them recommended by manufacturers, there are no data showing that they're better.
Right.
None.
And so from a consumer standpoint, because most of my channel is people who want to hear better.
Sure.
If someone is not verifying to one of these prescriptive methods, is it worth the risk of being mistreated or not treated properly with your hearing aids for them?
Wow.
Because I hear
I know. Let me direct you to, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, the work of Anu Sharma and her colleagues showing brain reorganization. And I have a quote of hers that I use in all my talks that showed that the brain reorganization does not occur if you're not giving the person the right amount of audibility. But when it does occur, there is improvement in cognitive function and other aspects. This is pretty important.
And
we're holding a person's brain in our hands. Audibility is so simple.
Right.
Why ignore it?
Yeah, no, and I completely agree. And we just had more data come out from Johns Hopkins that someone who's at a higher risk for cognitive decline, it actually reduces the rate of decline in those individuals by 48%.
Yeah. Yeah.
So obviously it's very important to make sure that everything is done exactly the right way.
I think, and let me add one more thing to that, because I just thought of another study of some years ago. Louise Hickson from Australia, they did a really nice study where they looked at long-term benefit and satisfaction, and they looked at something like 50 different factors. And the one factor that came out as number one, I wouldn't have guessed it. There was only, of the top 5 that were correlated, there were only 5 that were correlated. Only one had to do with the actual fitting. And it was match to target for soft inputs. For soft inputs.
And so I remember actually from your training that you like to match to soft targets first.
Absolutely.
And then go in and do the average and the loud.
For that very reason.
Yeah.
If somebody said, okay, you can only get one, normally we do soft, average, and loud. If somebody said, Gus, you can only get one of those 3 right, pick one, soft.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would make the argument, and it's purely an argument because I don't have any data to back this up at all, but I think that the reason that the better speech understanding and background noise is so important for people is because better speech understanding in a quiet environment has been relatively solved. Right? Even a non-ideal hearing aid fitting can get you better hearing in a quiet environment. And since that's been solved, obviously the next thing that we want is now when there's something else going on.
You say the word solved though, but again, it's only solved if the hearing aids are fitted correctly.
That is true.
The reason that I think, the reason that I think that Louise Hickson had the findings that she did is people maybe only spend 3% of their life in background noise, and sometimes it's nice to think about the other 97%. When somebody's talking to you from another room, did you hear them? And a lot of this, people come in and they say, I want to hear better in background, and but what I always then move them off to, but what about the rest of your life? I look at their hearing loss and I say, I can tell you this, you're not doing well and quiet either.
Yeah, and that's majority of individuals who feel like the hearing and noise is the only problem that they have, and they don't even really realize it until you actually treat them.
So you're right. We have solved it with the technology, but we'll only solve it when hearing aids are fitted correctly.
Yeah, that's absolutely a very good point. Now, I just want to briefly touch on this one. This is standard 11. So following individualization of verification of hearing aid gain and output, if the fitting is not acceptable to the patient, minor deviations in gain and output may be necessary. So I think a lot of people say, Cliff, you can't just fit everyone to target and say, here you go, you're done. That's really where it starts at. And you may, like you said, we're basing it on averages here. So some people might need more than that. Some people might need less than that for them to hear their best, right?
Yeah. And I think some of the people who are saying that to you have the misconception, when we fit a hearing aid, there are targets on the screen. And a lot of times people think of that as a dot. It's football season, so I'll use a football analogy. You have a goalpost, right? And if you kick it right down the middle, for a field goal, you get 3 points. But you know what? If it bounces off this railing and goes through, you know how many points you get? 3. Well, when we're fitting hearing aids, the range is plus or minus 5. Okay? So you can be, when you're 5 dB below that dot, you're still fitting the target. That's target. It's a range, it isn't a dot. And so I think that's part of it, is that people are a little too locked in that you have to be at a specific point. And then there are, everybody has a different loudness growth function that we're trying to accommodate. And yes, some people will be 2 standard deviations away, which means they might be, who knows, 8 dB below target or 8 dB above target. So yeah.
And I swear up and down that anytime that happens, I must have done something wrong. But it does happen from time to time.
And it should. Just statistics say it should. Because as an average, I noticed that your inseam is a little different than mine. And I thought I was average, really.
You are.
Not that I was looking, I wasn't looking at your inseam, I promise.
I appreciate that. The last standard that I want to touch base on here is number 14. So hearing aid outcome measures are conducted. These may include validated self-assessment or communication inventories and aided speech recognition assessment. So, and I talk about this a lot of time. Doing validation is different than verification, but how is that the case?
Well, I think, did we build the system right, and did we build the right system? Are 2 different questions, right? Mm-hmm. So we start off with did we build the system right? That's our probe mic measures. And then validation is, did we build the right system? And you only gather that over time. What should happen is, if you took a group of people, I think you've talked about it, we've all talked about it, the default fitting from most manufacturers shows a significant roll-up in the highs. Mike Valenti in his research showed that for the product he was testing, it was below the now by about 15 dB at 3K and 20 dB at 4K and 5 dB at 2 for soft inputs. So this is a lot of roll-off. Okay. So what we're looking at then is, if you took a group of people fitted that way, which I would say was incorrect, you took people fitted to the now, and you send them out for a month or 2 months or 3 months, and you have them fill out questionnaires. If it's a good questionnaire, the people who were fitted correctly should have better results. And they do. That research has shown that. So that's a validation that all of our probe mic stuff is not just something that was made up. It's validation that it's right, because it's verified by patients out using hearing aids in the real world, which is why we need these measures. And I think every clinic should have these measures. It's a nice way to grade yourself.
Yeah.
With the internet today, if you don't grade yourself, somebody else will grade you.
That is true. It's happening right now, right?
I've heard that.
Yeah.
I've heard that.
And I think that some people who feel like they're not having great success with hearing aids is because they don't know if everything has been done the right way, and they have not had a validated outcome measure to say, like, okay, you are performing this way right now, and we've done all these things to get you here. There's literally no stone that we haven't uncovered. This is literally your highest level of benefit. I think that there's people out there who are probably at their highest level of benefit. They just don't know, and they're still unhappy, right? But they shouldn't be unhappy. They should have had, verification and validation performed, and then once that's done, and you've had good counseling and all that, which I think that one thing that we don't get enough credit for as audiologists is the time that we're willing to spend to do the counseling with patients. And I think that, adding in a few more of these standards to our standard of practice inside of a clinic would dramatically increase uptake of hearing aids and satisfaction.
Absolutely. And I'd like to go back to what we talked about a half an hour ago, doing speech and noise testing. If you have a patient and you do a test and you see that the point that they're getting 50% correct is a signal to noise ratio of plus 16, that's a very, very different patient than somebody whose score is 4, plus 4. If those two people both, their goal is both to go to the same restaurant, I'd want them to know up front that Mr. Plus 16, your expectations are a little high. I've done everything I can for you, but you're either going to have to find a quieter restaurant or you need some kind of assistive listening device.
And that's the thing, is that I feel like assistive listening devices are under-recommended. And here's the thing, I think that the recommendation should be is that if you reach a certain score of signal to noise ratio loss that you can't overcome with just hearing aids alone, you should be at least recommended the device.
Sure.
Some people just don't want to use it though, right? And that's their decision. Most people don't want to use it, and that's their decision, and I'm okay with that decision if they make the decision for themselves that I don't want to actually incorporate this table microphone or clip-on microphone, but it should be recommended. So we've talked about a lot of like the standard for audiology and prescription hearing aid fitting. What have your findings been? I'm guessing somewhat similar to my findings when I do reviews of over-the-counter hearing aids, but what have you been seeing with these devices?
The one thing that actually what caught my eye was something that you had published on one of your YouTube channel shows. I think it's great that these things are less expensive and more accessible and all that. One of the things that concerns me is the idea of patients fitting themselves. And I know you pointed out in doing actually having somebody with a hearing loss going through the whole procedures. And what we're seeing is the initial fit from these devices tends to be ultra conservative by missing now targets by 15 dB or so. You've reported that. And this is not just one product. It's not one product. It's at least 3 or 4 that I've seen you report. This concerns me because I don't think that the average, I don't know if we call them a consumer or a patient when you buy an over-the-counter device, but I think the average person, I don't think they're very good at programming this to what is best for them. And I've done studies years ago with trainable hearing aids, which in a sense were self-fitting hearing aids. And what we found, we had one study that if we fit people 6 dB below target where they should be and sent them out and had them train the hearing aid, they came back in a month later 6 dB below target.
So they never migrated off of that? They never tried to challenge themselves and go higher? Did they even know that they were under target?
Well, it was a crossover study. And the interesting thing is when we fit people, the very same people, at a different month period, 6 decibel over target, they came back 3 dB over target. So but it was a different, it was, but only 3 dB. So the very same person ended up 9 dB difference. Now, you would assume that manufacturers of OTC products would read the literature. So if you want people to be happy and you want them to do well, what is the initial fit? Target, above target, or below target? By far the worst is to fit them below target because they're going to stay below target and they're not going to do well. And going back to here, what suffers the most is soft speech. And what I just said before is the most important. And I think it's a concern. You know, we have the Larry Hume study of 2017 where he had people, one big group of them were people, they were the placebo group, where they had zero gain and they weren't allowed to change anything. They wore the hearing aid for a month and they all paid for their hearing aids. And they came back after a month and the question was, do you want your money back or do you want to keep your hearing aid? 33% kept their hearing aids.
With zero,
there was zero gain.
All placebo.
Yeah,
100%
they were placebo. They kept their hearing aids.
So when you factor that into, well, you could, I guess, technically factor it into prescription, but you can definitely factor that into OTC. So there's a certain percentage of uptake and satisfaction could be achieved with applying no level of amplification.
Exactly, and that's scary.
Yeah, definitely.
Because the person is, maybe because they spent the money, maybe, I don't know, maybe they feel better wearing the, I don't know why you would want to keep something with no gain. So, you know, then it makes me wonder what percent of people out there will be seriously underfit.
Yeah.
Which tells me the world is still going to need us for a long time.
Yeah, well, I would agree with that. You know, and I guess the thing that worries me the most about that is that they would potentially never know that they're not getting what they need to get.
Of course not.
And when you factor in all of this information that's been building and the research that's been building on cognition, like you said, Dr. Anu Sharma and Dr. Hannah Glick up at University of Boulder, right?
Yeah, Colorado.
University of Colorado at Boulder. You know, all the information they've come out with, and then you have this Achieve study that just came out, and I feel like we have the potential for people to do real harm to themselves, even though it's not like a direct harm, like it's not in the moment, it's not like the hearing is going to blow up and kill them, right? But there's long-term ramifications if you don't get amplification set up the right way.
Well, I mean, there's this whole thing of acclimatization, and there's considerable research that says, yes, indeed, acclimatization does occur, particularly for loudness levels, but you can't acclimatize to something you don't hear.
Yeah.
You know, you're not going to acclimatize. And if I went down to Miami and spent all my day in an air-conditioned room, I probably wouldn't acclimatize to the humidity there. And so it's the same thing with hearing aids, is people have to hear what they need to hear to adjust to what they need to hear. And the only way that's going to happen is with encouragement from professionals like ourselves to say, I know it doesn't sound great. It's not supposed to sound great right now, but I'll guarantee you a month from now, you're going to like it, and we're both going to be happy.
That's right. You know, I was reading in grad school, I think it was Dr. Brian Taylor, who had written an article about acclimatization and how long it takes someone to actually adapt to those levels of amplification. I want to say that his, after he read all the research about it, was around 30 days that it took someone
we actually,
to adapt.
well, I was involved in a study on that, not with Brian, but it was about that same time frame. We actually, it was an interesting study. We had a group of people where we fitted them to correct NAL targets, and they agreed to be in this research. There were 24 of them. They agreed that they would wear these hearing aids, and they didn't have a way to change gain. And so we fit them with correctly for soft, average, and loud, and we told them it would be a 2-month study. And out of the 24 people, 2 people just said, I don't like these, they're just too loud, get me out of the study. So we kept 22 of those. And there's a scale that I developed with Catherine Palmer called the Profile of Aided Loudness. If anybody's interested, you can Google it, do Google images on Profile of Aided Loudness, and it's 12 questions of how you rate loudness. So we have 4 questions for soft, 4 for average, and 4 for loud. It's a lot of background, but it's important to get to my point here. So what we did then is we took these people out and we had them fill out this scale. First they filled it out on the day they were fitted. And their rating for soft sounds was higher than the way normal hearing people rate average level sounds. Average should be 4. They were rating it at 4.5. A week later, they were rating it at 4. A month later, they were rating it at 3.5, but 2 months later, they were rating it at 2.5, right where they were supposed to be.
So there you
go. But it took 2 months before they adapted to the loudness. I'm sure you have patients all the time who come in and say, I can hear my feet on a carpet. You got to fix that.
Yeah.
No, you're
No,
supposed
you gotta-
to hear
you
yourself
gotta let
walk
your
on a
brain get it,
carpet.
for sure.
Exactly. So yeah, acclimatization is an amazing thing. There's research shows that when fitted correctly, speech intelligibility actually improves a little. Just a little.
Yeah.
Not much, but a little.
Yeah, I usually tell people, if you're about 45 days out from your initial fitting
Yeah.
and a best practice protocol has been followed
Yeah.
and you're at your prescriptive targets
Yeah.
or as close as you can get to them with comfort,
Yeah.
that you're going to be doing really well at that point.
Part of our deal was that they had to agree to use the hearing aids at least 6 hours a day,
Okay.
because that's another factor, obviously,
Yeah.
if you're not wearing your hearing aids, which, of course, today in data logging, you know.
It tells on you. Remember that.
Exactly.
Well, very good. So, Gus, I really appreciate you coming out
Sure.
today. What's next for you? What do you have going on nowadays that really gets you jazzed about audiology?
Oh, wow. That's a tough question. Most people my age are retired, living in Arizona.
Yeah, hey, right?
Half of North Dakota is here. I just got together. I was reading comments actually from the Audiology Facebook pages, and I was seeing a person ask this question, and a person asked this question, and a person asked this question, and people would answer it, and half of the answers were actually wrong. And you talk about what gets me jazzed is I called my friends Todd Ricketts and Ben Hornsby, and I said, we're going to write an article about this basic thing that everybody had in grad school, but it isn't. And so we have an article coming out in November. It started off being 3,000 words, and it ended up at 13,000.
Oh my gosh.
All about, it's a how to do it, it's why you do speech and noise testing, how to do it, and step-by-step guidelines toward the end, just because it seems like, so that gets me excited. 2 years ago, same thing was word recognition and quiet, which is the most simplest things that audiologists do.
Yeah.
It's I wrote that with Ben Hornsby. It's by far and away the most read article ever that I've ever written, and it's on the most basic principle. We have well, I'm saying it to a guy who has 1 million reviews, but listen. We have like almost 5,000.
Well, that's
5,000 reviews for an article.
And that
a simple
and that is
that's
inside,
1/3 of audiologists.
That's exactly right. That's inside of the community of audiology.
Yeah.
And I realized when I started making my content, if I wanted mass people to watch it, I had to go to the consumer, not to professional.
Well, I guess somebody else could have, but these are people who took it for CEUs.
Yeah.
So we don't know who wrote it, who didn't take it for CEUs.
Yeah, that's
I'm
true.
assuming the average consumer didn't take it for CEUs.
Probably not.
But so my point is, little things like that really get me excited, because it's like, over 50 years, there's a lot of tidbits that one accumulates, and it's like, I should just put all those tidbits into one article.
Well, I think it really comes back to like following the fundamentals. A lot of people ask me how I got from being a Marine Corps sniper into audiology.
Sure.
And they're like, how is that even remotely similar? And I'm like, well, as a Marine Corps sniper, we care about two main things. Number one is following the fundamentals, and number two is doing them with precision.
Yeah.
Okay. And what you just alluded to is like it's a fundamental. It's a very simple concept, something that we should all be really good at. But you have to be able to do it with a high level of precision. You take a look at all the major like sports that are out there here in the United States, like basketball and football. They always talk about make sure that you do the fundamentals the right way. Never stop taking regular jump shots, because if you stop taking them, you start getting worse at them. Right?
A football team will spend 3 days just on tackling,
exactly.
even though they've been tackling since they were 6 years old.
Forever, exactly. And so I think it goes to that, and I would agree with you. Sometimes it's good for us to revisit the basics to make sure that we foundationally understand what we're doing, and then you can expand upon that once you have the foundation done. So, Gus, thank you so much for joining me.
Good time.
I have a thing to give you here.
Oh my God!
You gave me.
It's not a pink book.
It's not a pink book. I definitely chose my coloring a little bit better, but you get your very own Dr. Cliff Show mug.
Oh
there
my
you go.
God, that is.
So
in gold.
well, there
now,
you go.
Now, are there people who have it in silver or?
No, so we've got, let's see, we've got gold and silver, or let's see what color I got there. You're probably getting the reflection off of my chair.
Okay,
'Cause you
this
got a
is silver.
one.
This is silver.
Yeah.
Well, maybe if I work hard and this article gets good, I could come back and get a gold. You think?
Yeah, maybe I'll get you. I'll tell you what. If you come back, I will get you a personalized gold one.
All right, I
Yeah,
can hardly wait.
but thank you
That's an
so much.
incentive enough. You bet. Good
Awesome.
times.
Guys, thank
Good
you for
times.
joining us today. If you like this episode, make sure that you hit that like button. And if you want to catch all of these episodes, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with notifications turned on. And as always, we'll see you next time.